So quick introduction, name's TJ Connolly. I'm an engineer at Fireblocks. My background is cybersecurity. Spent majority of my career doing pen testing, application security work, and specifically in the cryptography realm, analyzing digital rights management products and things like that for vulnerabilities. So got into crypto last couple of years, just like everyone else here, and excited to be here. So my talk is really going to be about some of the most common wallet attack vectors that are out there. So, in order to understand an attacker and what they might want to do with, a piece of technology is to understand what are the core components of it, right? How does it work, really? And so, there's a very helpful adage that we have in crypto today. It's not your keys, not your crypto. And, just like that saying helps us remember, it really all boils down to the ownership of a private key, right? Private key is the number one and the only source of truth that denotes ownership of an asset or an account on a blockchain. That's just how they work. So this entire trust hierarchy of quite literally everything we have here today is all built on that underlying promise of a digital signature associated with a private and a public key. And so no surprise that this is obviously the main attack vector or the main thing that a bad guy would want to steal is your private keys. In addition to your private keys, attackers also want to steal, your access into your wallet or whatever financial platform you're using to custody your crypto. And so credentials and authentication, whether or not that's through phishing attacks, a legitimate insider stealing somebody else's credentials or using them nefariously, these are also very important threat vectors that you want to be aware of and mitigate. And then this is not exhaustive. So this list here that you see, this is not the only ways that you can lose crypto. But these are numbers. Private keys and credentials are really going to be the. Sorry, it looks like the formatting didn't translate well to PowerPoint, but it could be much more. But at the underlying, this is the keys to the kingdom is the private keys. So let's do a quick review here about how public-private key cryptography works. From here, we can then create our threat model of what an attacker would exploit or want to exploit in this process. So ownership and control of the private key, again, that's the root of user control over all of the funds associated with that address on the blockchain. So Bob has a wallet. Bob has a public-private key pair within that wallet. He uses that public-private key pair to then sign digital transactions with those. The blockchain then verifies that, yes, we know that Bob signed this transaction. It has a valid digital signature. We can, from that digital signature, derive that it came from the correct public-private key combination. And so the important aspect, security aspect of digital signatures is that they are one way. So meaning that with a digital signature, an attacker can't retrieve, your corresponding private key from it. And this is what the blockchain uses to really validate and ensure that, okay, this transaction came from the authenticated and authorized individual that has access to it. And so this process of creating a digital signature, which is, again, that's the final thing that the blockchain needs to know and see to get, authentication, authorization, it can be broken down in a couple of different stages. So the first one is going to be, how is the key actually generated? So, generally this is done through some type of random seed, whether or not that's hardware generated, software generated. You could go down the rabbit hole in that and, spend years of research just, figuring out the most secure ways to do that. Then you have the actual storage of the private key. Where is it held? Is it held in software? Is it held in hardware? Again, another rabbit hole you could go down. And then how is the actual signature, digital signature getting generated? Are there opportunities for an attacker to man in the middle of that process and manipulate that transaction before it's signed? So, and then lastly, signature verification. This is outside of kind of my talk. That's handled on the blockchain side, right? So again, bad guy here. If I've compromised the wallet or the software or the system where all of this activity, this digital signature activity is occurring, I can do a lot of bad things. So, one of the things that I could do is, okay, when I take that seed that then the rest of my wallet structure and my public and private keys are derived from, I can influence that seed maybe, right? So maybe I put it into a value that I know. And then from that, I can, effectively put in a backdoor and can reverse engineer any derived private keys from that. We saw this with the Juniper firewall. There was a big issue back in mid 2010s, where it came out that there were backdoors that the NSA were putting in a lot of these firewalls and encryption algorithms, kind of based on that seeding component, right? And then the actual storage of the key. So if I can just go in and directly steal the private key, that's going to be my fastest route, my easiest route generally. And then the process of manipulating the actual transaction itself. So if I'm Bob here, and I wanted to give Bob, I wanted to give Alice, $1, but the bad guy comes in, and without Bob knowing, he manipulates that transaction to then say, give bad guy $50 from Bob, and Bob sees that, but he unknowingly signs it anyways. And we see this a lot, right? This is very easy to do with phishing and other, types of social engineering and things like that. And Bob unknowingly goes, signs it, submits it to the blockchain. Blockchain doesn't care. All it sees is a valid digital signature, so it goes and it moves those funds. So a big mitigation that we have for this is Multisig Wallets. So Multisig has definitely been a good first step. This is really focused on the concept of, okay, we have a private key, and it's so important in the security stack. It's quite literally what it's all built on. And it's also a single point of compromise, right? So it's one private key held in one location. So with Multisig, we take that single private key, and we require multiple of them to then generate a digital signature. So if I'm an attacker, this makes my job a little bit harder, right? So now instead of having to go and compromise one private key to steal your funds, I have to go and steal all of them, within the Multisig wallet. We see, though, in practice, though, that this is, not the easiest thing to implement properly, right? A lot of the biggest hacks that we've seen over the last couple of years have been on Multisig wallets. And the reason for this is that process of just breaking up the private key, that's not enough, right? The private key needs to be computed on in a distributed manner such that it's never gathered at a single point. And a lot of these Multisig implementations, what they do is they're just, okay, maybe from the chain's perspective or, like a Gnosis Safe's perspective, yes, it's Multisig, but, the actual credentials to then unlock that are stored on, a server somewhere, right? And then the hacker attacks the server, steals credentials, keys to the kingdom. And so this is how the majority of these hacks really come about. It's not that Multisig is bad. Multisig is great, and it's an important piece of the stack. But there's a lot more improvements that could be made. And this is really where multi-party computation comes in. And so multi-party computation, what it is, it's the ability for untrusted parties to be able to compute a function over private inputs and keeping them private throughout that full life cycle. So underneath the hood, there's a lot of cryptographic primitives that allow this to occur. The idea here is that instead of that computation, that digital signature generation occurring on one system, it occurs in a multi-party distributed system, right? So now if I'm an attacker, I need to be able to go and not only compromise, system one where this is occurring, I need to compromise the entire MPC infrastructure. Another important cryptographic primitive here that makes this work is what's called threshold signatures. May seem very similar to multisig, as you see 3 key shares here. The main difference here is that those 3 key shares by themselves, they don't reveal any information to an attacker. Using what's called Shamir secret sharing, you can have those key shares such that if I'm a bad guy and I go and I steal 2 out of 3 of those, I don't gain any knowledge from that, right? I have perfect secrecy still of the private key and the corresponding signature that gets generated. And so when looking at comparing it, MPC against the predecessors, MPC really shines for all of these different categories. But MPC by itself, and like anything in security, is not a silver bullet, right? We always need to keep in mind that this is an arms race, it's an asymmetric battlefield, right? The attacker is always going to have the advantage. I've spent over 10 years responding to breaches. You can have the most mature security, but there's always going to be a weak point, and that's typically the human. And so what we've had are some hardware mitigations. So the big one is going to be hardware and offline wallets. So taking that process of storing the private key, generating the digital signature, and instead of doing it on an internet-connected device that could potentially have malware on it, let's do it on something that's air-gapped, right? Doesn't scale very well, very secure, but doesn't scale very well. And so what we have is this concept of secure enclaves. You might hear this called different things according to different people, but hardware isolation, trusted execution environments. Effectively, what these are dedicated chipsets on a computer that are for trusted applications. So, things like producing digital signatures. And so Intel SGX is really the leader here from an enterprise data center kind of perspective. The capabilities of Intel SGX is that, number one, it's trustless. All of the requirements for an MPC algorithm to work can be codified directly into the SGX enclave. And so what that means is that effectively the base operating system or the root user or the system admin, or even if I have malware on that server, I still shouldn't be able to see and reach into that Intel SGX enclave, because the only thing that's getting leaked or getting revealed are zero knowledge proofs or other types of non critical or sensitive information. In addition to this, we have both Android and Apple mobile devices today have very secure implementations of something just like Intel SGX. They make them a great candidate for implementing an MPC algorithm. And so with this, though, we must always be aware that hardware attacks, those are always going to be present. You can always have an attacker, if they have physical access to a system, they're going to go ahead and do a side channel attack. So, we still need to add some more defense in depth here in order to protect against this. And so at Fireblocks, what we do is we take that threshold signature, those private key shares, and we break them up into at a minimum, three politically and logically separated environments, all running on secure, trusted hardware. So, from the user's perspective, what would that look like? You'd have one key share on a mobile device. You'd have one key share running on an Intel SGX server in Microsoft Azure, and one key share running on IBM Cloud. And the idea here is that, let's say the worst case scenario happens, and I'm a bad guy, and I get physical access to the Azure data center that your key share is stored on it. Not only that, I'm able to go and execute a hardware attack, right? With that single key share, in the extremely unlikely event that an attacker is able to pull that off, they're not going to be able to gather any information, right? Because of Shamir secret sharing here and perfect secrecy. And so when thinking about MPC, right, this is an incredibly, incredibly important part of it, right? MPC doesn't provide you anything if it's being executed on centralized hardware, right? So the last one is going to be, just general governance of the wallet. Who's able to move funds where and when? Is there a specific quorum of approvers required, just like a multisig? What happens when, my credentials are stolen? And the nefarious insiders, that's always a top-of-mind one. And so what we do at Fireblocks is we help customers implement this through a rule set. We call this our transaction authorization policy. And, it's a codified set of rules that you can enforce and implement to make sure that, all right, we know that this is how assets typically move within our organization. Let's enforce that. And anything that violates that or goes around that, then we need to have human eyes on it, right? Maybe we need a quorum of approvers on it. And so with these kind of this multi-layered defense and depth strategy, with MPC, CMP, the algorithms itself running on distinct hardware, secure, trusted hardware, Intel SGX, and then with this automated policy engine, this is really kind of the industry, like the leading security stack today for digital assets and digital wallets. So with that, thank you for your time. And I'll be over in the conference, probably at the Fireblocks booth, if you have any questions. So, thanks.